had the opportunity to view Mercy's work, so I'm so thrilled that you're getting to hear from her in person. This is Mercy Hawkins, and her exhibition is Lost Keys, and so it's everything in this hallway, and then also pieces featured over in K Hall in the atrium and up on the sculpture terrace. So as part of this exhibition, Mercy created some site-responsive pieces that are displayed outdoors, so it's such a different way to engage with her work. So if you haven't been in those spaces yet, I encourage you to check them out. So Mercy Hawkins is an interdisciplinary artist and an educator. She's based in Sacramento. She received her BA from California State University, Sacramento, with a minor in history, and her MFA from University of California, Davis. She was recently a graduate fellow in residence at the Headland Center for the Arts, and she currently teaches art at CSU Sacramento and Davis. And through her practice, she draws inspiration from nature, language, and music, and she combines craft traditions rooted in the history of the women in her family with all different sorts of artistic methods like collage, assemblage, sewing, painting, and drawing. So diverse media and processes, and I won't say more, but this is Mercy Hawkins. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I'm really excited to speak to you all about the work and the transition that's taken place in the work. I have been making things since I was a very small child. I was always using my hands and exploring new materials, everything from plaster. My childhood room has plaster characters all over the walls. And I grew up in the 90s, so it's really funny to go look at my dolls now. They all have hair wraps. I don't know if you grew up in the 90s, hair wraps were like a super big trend. And so I would just spend hours practicing my hair wraps. So I've always been really drawn to materials and making. I see the things that I make with my hands, it's a form of thinking for me. So you can see with the work how that really manifests. So I started as a painter and drawer, much like Alex. And when I started my academic art career, and this is a pretty emblematic work of what I was doing, and it's just super saturated work, led by color and pattern, but I was never ever able to get the space that I wanted in my two-dimensional works. So I ended up moving around this time into my grandparents' house, and that kind of really set me on this this path to change. I took out my grandmother's and my aunt's sewing materials, and I started to really try to do what I'm doing in the two-dimensional work, but using traditional craft materials like fabric and fiber. And I started to just teach myself how to sew. My grandmother and my aunt died very young, and so they were never able to teach me. So I just started using their materials. And I didn't know I was going to get emotional, but the work really started to feel like more of a connection to the work. And somehow I became a proficient sewer. I really leaned into all of the mistakes, and like my zigzag stitch was super wonky and threaded, and I really enjoyed the way that looked. And I like to think that my grandmother taught me how to sew in my dreams. I'm actually, where I sew now is the same place that she sewed. So that's how I went from this to this. I also was never really able to get the space that I wanted in my two-dimensional work. And it seemed to be very important. One of the great and amazing things about sculpture is space. So I can finally get the space and this sort of aliveness that I'm looking for, this sort of embodiment that sculpture gives for me. There's a quote that I love from Emily Dickinson. It goes, nature is a haunted house, and art is a house that tries to be haunted. And so, I really want these works to sort of come alive. So a little bit about my process. I really work very improvisationally. I like to build, certain puzzle pieces. I have a few examples here. Like, I sew interface to the fabric parts to give them a sort of structure. And the Yupo paper, I use heavy Yupo paper, which already has structure to it. And also like little borders around all of the edges of the pieces. And then they'll all get sewed together by the borders. So it's kind of like making up new rules, just kind of what works is what I go for. And the work is very much, in my mind, it has a lot to do with, this is another piece, and I brought this as well. So I'm always thinking about pattern making. So the way that two different shapes, when you bring them together, like how to get, a simple dome. So this is kind of my thinking. I also brought an early work. This right here is an example. I draw a lot from basket weaving. And so when I first began, I started making these really big, huge, kind of biomorphic baskets, just out of this coil basket weaving method. And they took forever. So that's why I started to move towards the textiles and the paintings that would give me my forms faster. And then also I started as a painter, and painting is still very important to me. And so I really enjoyed bringing my painting practice into the work somehow, And so I got my MFA during the pandemic, which was really very strange. But because you think it's going to be a time where everyone is going to see your work more than ever, but it was the exact opposite. Everything was just shown on Zoom or social media. So I really, how does the work get seen? So that's when I started to really think about just display it outdoors so that people can see it. And so that's how the work moved outside. And you can really see the transition from two-dimensional to these smaller sculptures. And then up on the terrace, I have a place in the sun, which is the sun pins. So I really started to think about the viewer's relation to the body of the work, and the work in the atrium. Everything just kind of grew in scale. I wanted it to be larger than you, larger than me, so you'd have to look up. So you wouldn't just see the work, but you would also feel it just by sheer size, the scale of it. And then also moving outside, I had that 1-year residency at the Headland Center for the Arts where I was really able to, it's very windy there all the time, and here. So I really started to lean in towards the wind, and really loved what it did to the sculptures. So I started to add the fibers more purposefully for the wind to interact with them. And I really enjoyed that collaboration. And so that leads to the terrace work and all of the installation there where the fibers are moving. And I'll say a little bit more about craft. I'm really drawn to craft. I'm very invested in the labor of the work, and craft often has its roots, at least in the United States, with craft guilds and very tied to labor in our early history. And so I really want my audience to see the labor in the work, that the way it comes into being, the stitch of my hand, the dashes, the dotting, becomes a part of the sort of aliveness of the work. That you're not just taking in, what it looks like, but you're taking in, all of the hours of work as well. And that lends itself towards a part of the mystery or the aliveness that I seek. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you. Oh, questions. If anyone has questions, yes.
Yeah, I have a question. So once you put the pieces outside, Mercy, did you spend time with them outside? I'm wondering how that went, right? You bring this piece outside, and did you sit with it or spend time? And
Yeah.
how did you learn to go bigger from there or more focused on movement from there?
I was able to spend time with it more when that piece was conceived while I was still at Headlands. So I put it out there, and I really spent a lot of time with it at the beach, was kind of where I first set that up. And I would just lay with the work and be so relaxed and just be like, man, I really enjoy hanging out with these guys on the beach. It's overcast, and they're like, the frenzy of the wind makes the work so alive and electric. But up on the terrace, less so.
Yeah, I think that kind of time, I can see that in the work in addition to the labor that you speak of.
Yeah.
That's the time that the labor takes, but then also the time of them spent outside and that kind of memory of that experience. It's exciting.
Yes. It's like a piece of my mind is out there on the terrace for months now, just like blowing in the wind. It's really, I don't have any children, but it's like a piece of me is running, through the playground. Sure, it's a little bit maybe, but it feels like. I'm gonna go visit them after this talk. Yeah.
I would love to know the process behind this piece.
Yeah, I still do two-dimensional work. Like, I love to use the ink, and these are really, I didn't really speak about too much meaning, but I really think a lot about music, and when I'm making these, and I really, to get music, you use repetition and pattern and shifts in value, and movement through the work in order to get that. So this was the first work I made at Headlands, and it just kind of fell out of me, and it's called In Light of the Wind. So it's really trying to capture, again, just this kind of obsession with the wind, trying to get that movement in a two-dimensional, and a work that doesn't have color as well. So maybe trying to show color without showing color.
Are all of the patterns done by hand, or are you doing some pressing here?
There's some printing. I use a lot of, I use anything, whatever. So you can kind of see, I use Legos at times. This is actually a basket, like a strawberry basket that I use as a print. I'll use like tape that's kind of like crinkled up to get some of these shapes. Here's Legos right here. And then I'll use like the side of like anything really, and then kind of swirl it. So I'm always really trying to find different ways and different movements to get different patterns. Like these are really fun because the answer is always yes. There's like no wrong move. It's a very improvisational, and I don't put in any restrictions. And I just say, if I mess it up, I'll just fix it with the next move. So really leaning into mistakes, not seeing them as mistakes, but so letting it come quite naturally. But I teach fundamentals in school. Those fundamentals are drilled into my head. So like really trying to still make a sound, balanced composition.
Is there any like specific type of music that like motivates you the most?
I listen to a lot of jazz. My partner, who's here actually today, is a jazz scholar, so he exposed me to a lot of different kinds of jazz, free jazz, bebop. So that's probably the single answer, but I listen to all kinds of music.
I was actually going to ask something similar to that because in class we were here like a week or two ago and we came to look at all these as well. And when we looked at this one and you said that this one in particular has like a jazzy feel to it. With the
Yeah.
melodies and the patterns, there's like a groovy jazzy feel.
For sure, I get so much inspiration. I see so many colors and shapes and movement. It's just, and there's so much layers and the percussions. You know, I try to get the beat in there by the shifts in the color and the shifts in the size of the sort of mark making that I use, just to show, you know, what I hear in the music, but visually. I'm glad that you picked up on that. That's pretty incredible. Yeah.
I appreciate hearing about just like the evolution of your work and kind of how you have moved into trying different materials and moving from 2D to 3D pieces. And I'm curious to hear like if you know what's next. Like what are you interested in experimenting with in terms of materials or form or subject that you haven't gotten to yet?
Oh, I mean, I still want to work outside. I'm pretty obsessed with those arches. I started to make Well Wish for Water upstairs, and on the terrace has, in the planters, are these kind of arches that come over. I love what they're doing up there, but I really love what they do when they're all kind of wrapped together, and I have a bunch in my living room right now, and it's kind of like trying to get a painting. It's still trying to get what I do in the painting, but with a three-dimensional form, and they kind of look very gestural. The way the process of putting these forms together, you try to get it to do what you want, but it really has kind of a life of its own. So I kind of just, it's always a collaboration between me and the materials, and I enjoy that improv. So if it's telling me it doesn't want to go down and it wants to go this way, I let it. So it really looks like this kind of very gestural painting, but in space. And I still want to do outdoor sculpture. So those are the two spaces I am working in, yeah. And everything's tall. Like I mentioned, I really enjoy the relationship between the body so that you're not just seeing it, you're really feeling it as well. That seems really important to me.
For your pieces that are outside, do you feel like time and the elements is also kind of like another medium because you're letting
For sure.
these things get, wet and, the fog is also probably doing something.
Yeah.
But do you kind of get worried about, or do you kind of want to see what that's going to look like in the future?
They're definitely changed. There's a little fading, like some of the cheaper fibers are all faded out. They're all like a light gray, but a lot of the more expensive fibers like the hemp and the flax, the linen thread, that's what it's called. They're keeping their color, but they all look like they've had like a 1 month blowout. They're getting their fibers done in the salon of the world. But there is fading and a frizzing that's happening, but I really love it. Like I love what it does, and it's different from the ones that are fresh in my living room. They don't have that kind of worn look, and I'll mention so much of the work was actually inspired by a trip to Santa Fe, New Mexico, earlier this year, and I went to a graveyard in Taos, and it was pretty incredible. Everything is kind of a different graveyard. Was being moved by the wind, and there was this sort of very aliveness that I felt there. And I didn't realize with that installation that that's what I was doing, but I was really trying to go for that same kind of aliveness that I felt in that graveyard. Yeah. Everything's all worn, and the wind and dusty and faded and looked like it'd been there for for years. And that's definitely the presence
Do you
there.
envision yourself showing those pieces that are left out inside to see like that's a totally different?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to. Sign me up. Yeah, it would have a different feel for sure, taken from the constant motion into a slow gallery, where you're just feeling the kind of the air conditioner maybe, but they still look windblown. That would be very interesting. For sure. Any other questions? Well, thank you all so much for listening. I really appreciate it.